we're focused together on how can you build a sustainable, durable, profitable business that you scale. More, better, cheaper, more consistent, more scalable. What are the 3 best scaling leverage points? And that's the magic of scaling. That's how these scaling leverage points.
Maui Mastermind presents the Business Coach Podcast, answering your questions and providing real actionable insights for building a better, stronger, more profitable business without sacrificing your time, life, or freedom anymore.
Well, welcome to another episode of The Business Coach. I'm your host, David Finkel. In today's episode, it's the start of a multi-part series about scaling leverage points. And I want to talk today about an overview of what are the 3 best scaling leverage points. I'll get into some of the nitty-gritty around it, as always, trying to give my best for it. But I want today to be fast. I want today to be really strong, hard-hitting ideas that are going to help you to think about your business and how to scale your business differently. We'll go deeper dives in some of the coming weeks here about ways to scale your companies, these leverage points, choice of target audience, choice of product or service, and some other pieces in there. But for now, I want to start off broader. You have 3 main ways when you think about this to scale your company, 3 leverage points for that. I want to talk about all 3 of these. And I want to give you, again, a conceptual way to think about this. The first is with lead generation. So number 1, how do we have better lead generation? Now, lead generation, as we think about it, how do I have more prospects coming in, right? How do we get more? How do we get better prospects coming in? How do we get less expensive? So we'll put cheaper prospects, although that word sometimes has a bad connotation. How do we get more consistent? And as we're thinking about it here, how do we get on this part here more scalable lead flows coming in? So we've got lead generation, right? How do we get more prospects? How do we get better prospects? How do we get less expensive prospects? How do we get more consistent prospect flows? And how do we get more scalable prospect? When we think about that here, that's the first major leverage point for scaling your company. Now let's go to the second one, which is on lead conversion. And on lead conversion, now we're at the point where we're selling. Spell lead conversion here. Here we go. I-O-N. I froze for a moment there. So lead conversion, how do we take these prospects coming in and convert them into paying customers and clients? Again, same kinds of leverage points. How do we have more sales happening? How do we have better sales, better customers that we're doing that? How do we have less expensive or cheaper conversion, cheaper customers, the cost to acquire a new customer? How do we have better conversion rates? How do we have better rates of conversion? And then finally, how do we have more scalable conversion capacity? You're noticing a pattern here, aren't you? More, better, cheaper, more consistent, more scalable. Those are coming through, whether it's on lead generation or, as in this case, we're talking now about lead conversion. And then we've got one more area of great opportunity, which we're going to call that the client lifecycle. And all these things lead into getting some great customers and great clients into our lives. But now, how do we basically, on number 3, how do we do better at managing the life cycle of those customers, right? How do we have longer retention? How do we have faster repurchase cycles? How do we have better back-end cross-sell and upsell opportunities to take and grow a client relationship? How do we have better referral systems to generate more referrals off our active customer base? How do we have better reactivation systems so we take those customers that left us and bring them back into the fold for them to repurchase? Those are some examples there as we manage the life cycle. And when I do all 3 of these things, right, what that leads to is a massively scalable, profitable, and durable business. And that's the end goal, isn't it? How do I create a profitable, scalable, durable business? Obviously, ideally, independent of you, the owner of the business. That's one of the things that we work with all of our clients on. It's the core theme here for the Business Coach podcast is we're doing these things to create an owner-independent business, to build a business, not just to own a job. So as we think about these understandings, let's come into them more in depth. So we talked just even like lead generation. What are some of the most important metrics or key performance indicators that we pay attention to when it comes to the world of lead generation? We're going to look at things like our cost per lead, or things like the raw number of leads, the number of leads and the cost per lead based on breakdown by what was the marketing tactic that we're using from that part. Lead scoring, if I have too many leads coming in relative to my current sales capacity, for example, let's say I have 100 leads coming in every month on average, and I've only got 2 salespeople, and those salespeople can effectively run 40 leads a month. They can do the 50, but they're going to be running with their heads chopped off, so to speak, and they can't do it very effectively. One way to say is, I hire a third salesperson. That is very true. You could do that. Another way to go is to use lead scoring. And you can look at it and say, well, of those 100 leads, 20 of them are fantastic leads. 20 of them are really good leads, not quite fantastic, but they're really good. The other 60 are just so-so leads. How do we make sure our best sales ability, our best sales attention go to those top 20 and those secondary 20 after that? And then the other ones, if we're going to let something slip through, we're going to let those lower quality leads. Doing something as simple as that. I mean, that's a pattern I've coached many of our business coaching clients to do. And something as simple as that has made the difference for a client of having 3 million a year in sales to having 6 million a year in sales, literally doubling sales volume for companies, and doing that over the course of 12 to 24 months without hiring more staff on the sales side. Again, that's an example for what that might look like. So we come back here and we think about lead generation. Actually, I'm going to share one of my most favorite ones. I hope you've got everything down here on the board. I'm going to come back and share one of my most favorite lead generation metrics. It's one that I think is underutilized. It's a way to compare apples to apples marketing tactics in a way that you can actually put them side by side. And when you put them side by side, what it allows you to do, it makes obvious sense where you should be putting more energy and attention. Have you ever had the situation where you looked at your marketing and you've got a number of different tactics? Like, just think about it this way as we line it out. You've got certain marketing tactics. And these marketing tactics that you have, let's just look at it. You might have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the list might go on of these various marketing tactics that you have. Right next to that, you're thinking about, okay, what's the raw number of leads that those tactics bring in? The number of leads might be the next place that you're looking at with that. As we're kind of lining this out here, the next place we're looking at there might be the dollars sold to those leads. Again, I'm simplifying this. You're probably going to have the cost of those tactics. Let's even put that on here. Let's call this our spend. We're going to have our spend. We're probably going to have the dollar per lead coming in, but just even on these few things that we've laid out here, the number of leads, the number of dollars sold, the actual dollars spent on that tactic, we do something just as simple as that, and some things become really obvious. So an example, and this is one based on an actual coaching client of ours, they were a construction business. They did, in construction world, for those of you who don't know, there are 2 different there's more than 2, but in that world, and when you look at which types of businesses tend to have the highest gross profit margins in the world of construction, on the lower end, you tend to have more of your production builders. On the upper part of that, you have your windows people, doors, windows, siding, tend to be a higher margin business. So they did a lot of those higher margin types of services, but they had a couple different tactics. One of their tactics was pay-per-click. One of those tactics was direct mail. They'd send direct mail pieces to people in a particular community. And they had a whole host of other ways of doing it, but we'll just focus on these 2 here. When I look at the numbers with them, we sat down and we looked at the numbers. Here's the first number that jumped out to them. let's take about, for one period of time, they had spent $100,000 in one period. Over the course of a year, they were spending probably closer to $400,000. But in this period we were looking at, to get a comparison, to make some smart decisions about where to put their energy, 100 grand is what they spent on pay-per-click, roughly. Now, their direct mail during that same period, they spent about $40,000, or certainly many-fold less than they did on the other. Now, when we look closer, number of leads, I'm just going to give you some generalities. They had generated 300 leads, and the direct mail had, from the pay-per-click, and the direct mail had generated roughly 100 leads with that. So that's interesting by itself, but it's still hard to compare. Now we have to ask, what did they actually generate? These 300 leads from pay-per-click, generated around $250,000 of revenue, and those 100 direct mail leads generated about the same amount of revenue. Now, just from hearing that and looking at the fact they only spent 40 versus 100 to get the revenue, it jumps out at us that one was a better one. But there's a simple way to actually quantify it. So when you're looking across different ones, we call this your ROI per dollar spent. I'll write that down. Your ROI per $1 spent. And the way we look at that is we simply take our $40,000 and we look at that and we say, if I think about that, we generated $250,000 from that 40. 250 divided by $40,000, it's going to give you a make sure I get the math right here, 6.25, which means that for every $1 spent on the direct mail, they generated $6.25 of gross revenue. And for every $1 they spent on the pay-per-click, they generated $2.50 of gross revenue, of actual revenue before any expenses. Now, you can refine this and you can look at your ROI in terms of gross profit per dollar spent on a marketing tactic. But what it does is it lets you quickly get rid of the fact or compare apples to apples. We don't have to worry about the fact that we spent more or less on one particular way. And it also takes into fact of how many dollars have been sold. Most people, when they're looking at their lead generation, they look at what's my cost per lead. Well, the cost per lead is, and we can figure it out right here, it's shown, right? Our cost per lead, if we spent 100 grand to generate 300 leads, that's about $333, and it's exactly $333.33 was your cost per lead. Your cost per lead for direct mail, if you spent $40,000 to generate 100 leads with that part, I don't have a calculator handy, but we could do the math, right? We simply would take that $40,000 and divide it by 100, and that's going to give me, if I'm doing my math on the fly here, I'm looking at that's at $400 per lead is our cost per lead. And you'd say, oh gosh, pay-per-click, we get our leads for cheaper. It's only $333 per lead versus our direct mail is $400 per lead. And that would be ridiculous because we haven't thought about what's the quality of the lead. And it's not even the conversion rate in terms of the number of sales, it's how much did they go on to spend. Your direct mail people might have gone on to spend much larger jobs versus your pay-per-click people that might do much smaller jobs. And if we really want to get good at this, we look at it not just relative to dollars sold, but to gross profit generated. So we would actually look at what's our return for every $1 we spent, how much gross profit did we get back? That would be probably the ideal way of looking at it. So coming back to the idea we talked in here about these growth levers, these scaling leverage points. One was about lead generation. When I can look at these various types of metrics in my business, I can make smarter, better decisions about which of these tactics are actually working best for me. And then there's a really important principle for scaling. I'm going to write it down here on the board. It is critical. It's critical. And here's what it goes by. We want to feed our winners. And we do that by starving our losers. So I gave you an example of this construction coaching client of ours. Pay-per-click turned out to be, for them, one of their losers in terms of propositions. And so for them in their world, it turned out that it was a much better tactic for them to take roughly 3/4 of their pay-per-click budget and redirect it toward direct mail, toward one other tactic, and then they actually pocketed over $100,000 of additional profit because the pay-per-click wasn't paying off nearly enough when they looked at how much gross profit was generated for every dollar spent. Feed your winners, starve your losers. It's a really important part. So we do that with lead generation. When we look at lead conversion, there are so many ways that we can improve that. We'll just even talk about a couple. We think about lead conversion, and often we think, it's all about our salesperson or salespeople. If Joan or Joe would just do better on the closing and the conversion. But like I mentioned before, what about lead management and lead scoring? If I know that a certain kind of lead is better, I should give those better leads to better attention and to my best people. Here's another example. You might find that you've got two different tactics. You've got tactic number 1 and tactic number 2 in terms of how you generate leads. And you might find that when you look at tactic number 1, the conversion of that is different. You might have 5 different salespeople, and you might find that one person sells them at 20% conversion, one person's at 22% conversion, one person's at 40% conversion, and the others are at 20% and 21%. Well, from this tactic, if I'm looking at this, for every lead that I take away from these people generating at 20% conversion and give to the person generating 40% conversion on average, I've doubled my sales from the same lead flow just by doing that. That's not about sales ability. That's about lead management. And for me as a manager managing my sales force, I should be very strategic about that. Now, of course, I need to be aware, does that salesperson now hit a point of saturation where when I give them additional leads, their conversion rate starts going down because they can't effectively follow up with all the leads that I'm giving to them. And that's an important point to keep in mind. But my point here is when we think about these scaling leverage points, there's a very basic level that business owners think about. They think, I just need to generate more leads. It's a very gross understanding. When we look at it with a little bit more nuance, and I'm hoping if you're taking anything away from the Business Coach podcast, I'm hoping that you're taking away the idea that you need to have more sophistication, more nuance as a business owner. And one of those things, for example, on lead generation is that not all lead tactics are made equal. And so if we can start having better views in there, one of the scaling leverage points is to generate more, better, cheaper, more consistent, more scalable leads by looking at things like which tactics are generating our best prospects, which pools should we be fishing in, our choice of target audience, hugely important. Our choice of which tactic to use, hugely important. A/B testing along the way to optimize those lead funnels, etc. We look at conversion, same thing goes on here for conversion. We can't just think about conversion as I need to have my salespeople have a better closing rate. Well, yes, and we can work on tools to help them do that, training to help them be better. We can hire more or better salespeople and upgrade the team. We can do all of those things. But we should also look at other pieces like, what are some of the ways I do lead management? What are some of the ways that I, for example, if I have 2 salespeople who are really good with one tactic, but not another, and I've got 3 other people who are really good at this second tactic, let them take the leads that they're best at closing, right? Be strategic about that. We can also look at conversion optimization, things like, what do we do before they get to the appointment? Whether that's a virtual sales appointment, a phone call, an in-person visit, doesn't matter. You might find that you have a 50% no-show rate for your sales team members. Of all the things you could do, it's probably going to be to how do I get that 50% show rate to be 60, 70, 80% show rate. That's got to have a much bigger impact on your scaling than taking someone who's closing at 24% and making them close at 26%. Let's take the other place first and plug that. And then finally on client lifecycle. We often think about, to scale my company, I need to have more leads that I sell more to, right? More leads that I close. Well, what about after the point of sale? How do I retain these people longer? How do I make sure that these people who are a customer of ours buy again more frequently? I'll give you a straightforward example. One of the owners we coached, she owned 3 different hair salons. Here's an example she gave. She said, David, most men get their hair cut every 6 to 8 weeks. Now, we're a high-end salon. The men that we cut their hair, we want them to come in every 3 to 4 weeks as our optimal, not 6 to 8 weeks. And we do that, number one, they look better. And since they're our customer, we want them looking their best. Number two, think about that. If we go from every 8 weeks to every 4 weeks doing it, it's going to double the amount of business just by accelerating the repurchase cycle. And that happens in a lot of different business. You say, David, I'm a doctor. What does this have to do with me? Okay, let's imagine you're a dermatologist and you own, rather than 3 hair salons, you own 3 dermatology clinics. Well, how frequently do you get your people in to do skin checks? The industry standard is to try to get them in there every 12 months. But most of the dermatology groups that we work with a number of them, the reality is their average repurchase, so to speak, their average revisit, it might be closer to every 18 or 24 months. Let's speed that up by better education, by better scheduling. When the person leaves, making sure they have the next appointment already on the books. How about this one here? How do we increase retention by looking at what are the major drop points where we lose customers, we lose clients? One of the manufacturers that we coached, they made a specific type of industrial fluid for people who had CNC shops, which are basically businesses where they're cutting or processing metal. And as you can imagine, when you're processing metal, it creates heat. And so you need lubricants from that part, both to wash away metal chips and also to make sure nothing overheats and gets ruined, either the part you're making or the machine that's doing the cutting, so to speak. Well, they had customers that would purchase, but if they can teach their customers how to more optimally use so that they get the best result, that's going to be one way. We also look at how do they look at losing customers? How do competitors get in there? And if we become strategic about what the major drop points are, like for example, one of the drop points for many business-to-business sales is when the person you have the relationship with, when they leave the organization and a new person comes into that role purchasing, that's a point of vulnerability. How do you protect yourself from that, right? How do I make sure I have more relationships with people in the company versus just with the purchasing person? How do I have some visibility with when that person might be leaving? How do I make sure that we make our product or our service indispensable? We make the switching cost so great. We make it where we have that where if it were to want the new purchasing person wanted to switch, that their team would have an outcry about that. How about this one? Referral systems. If we look at the life cycle of a client, part of that life cycle of that relationship is how do we make sure that the 1,000 customers that we have generate another 500 more new customers or even 1,000 more new customers over their life cycle through referrals. Not just haphazard word of mouth, but formalized points and times and systems by which you ask for a referral opportunity, right? So these things, lead generation, lead conversion, client life cycle, if we really want to look at them as leverage points to scale, we need to think about them in more sophisticated, nuanced ways. It's no longer good enough for us to just look at them and just say, oh, more leads is what we need. Well, do we need more leads or do we need higher quality leads? Do we need more leads or do we need a more consistent lead flow? Do we need more leads or do we need to drive down the cost of leads? Do we need more leads or do we need a more scalable, predictable prospect flow? Do we need better conversion? Is that just by our salespeople? Are there systems around it, which would be better sales management, better lead management, better follow-up systems, automated follow-ups for people that are in your funnel? I mean, just think about it. That Windows company, they spent $333 per lead that came in from pay-per-click. That's just an example that I used. It wasn't the exact number. But how are they following up with those people? They have the first pass, but if that is not successful, how are they reworking those leads over time and following up, making sure nothing is slipping through the cracks? One of the people that we work with, their cost per lead is closer to $10,000 per lead. Now, they're selling a much more expensive service offering, so it's worth it for them to pay that. But you can imagine that follow-through, that follow-up is a really important point. And then the client lifecycle is a place that commonly business owners have a very primitive understanding of. They look at it and think of themselves as we promised a product, we promised a service, we're going to fulfill on that product, we're going to fulfill on that service, and that's it. And they leave repurchasing to chance. They leave retention to chance. Just do a good job, they'll stay with us. Well, no. No, people leave for a variety of reasons. We should be much more thoughtful, strategic, nuanced about how we retain customers. Hey, we get word of mouth. Well, great, but how are you using formalized referral systems to go from the every 10 customers of yours gives you one new customer to every 10 customers of yours gives you 5 new customers? Or the Holy Grail, every 10 customers of yours gives you 10 or 11 new customers, right? With that part. That should be your goal, and to do that requires a more nuanced understanding of formalized referral systems. And then finally, what about reactivation? You're going to lose clients over time. You can't help it. I don't care what product or service you're selling it. Some of those people are going to fall by the wayside, even if you gave them incredible value. What's your active process by which you go back to them to get them to repurchase? How are you keeping the relationship alive even when they're not with you? And then how do you, on a timed, formalized basis, go back to ask them in a compelling way to repurchase from you? You do those things, and here's how it all works. When we put this all together, when you look at lead generation, and you can make through perhaps better choice of target audience and better choice of which tactics to use, and by spending more intelligently with how you do your marketing spend, and you can make your lead generation 15% better, and you can make your lead conversion the next kind of leverage point, and through maybe better lead management. And then maybe for you, as we think about this here, you're going to have better conversion on the sales people side, and you're going to have better tools to use for that conversion, to have better follow-up tools for follow-up with that part. And if you can make that just 10% better. And then we look at the customer life cycle, right? And we increase retention, and we increase the repurchasing frequency, and we do better about reactivating old customers. And maybe that makes the business 25% more revenue. We look at all these things together. What we've just done, it's a 50% improvement, but it's not just the 50% improvement one time. Because these things are systemic, they're going to last over time and give you these advantages that compound from year 1 to year 2, from year 2 to year 3. Think about it. Where else can you have an investment where you might have a 50% compound rate simply by the accretion, the slow buildup of a number of things that you do? This is how, when we're coaching a client, that over the course of the first year or two, they might see a gain, right? They might increase revenue and profitability by 15%, by 22%. But when we stay with it in year 3, and year 5, and year 7, and year 10, this is how that company 10x'd, 20x'd during that 10-year period, because they compounded the gains from the prior years, and that's the magic of scaling. That's how these scaling leverage points come into practice. So in future episodes, we'll get into more details. We'll go down some deep rabbit holes about how you do that with lead generation or with retention. But I want you to leave with this idea that in your business, if you want to scale it, you need to increase or improve your sophistication as you think about the business. One way to do that is to look for, how can I create small advantages, whether it be in some aspect of lead generation, lead conversion, or the client lifecycle, and how can I then have multiple of these small improvements start to cumulatively compound over time. And this is how you 10x, 20x, 100x a company over the course of 7, 10, 20 years. Now I'm talking the long haul here because I'm assuming at this point that if you're part of this community, that you're not in it for just a quick hit. You're not looking just to say, hey David, help me make another $50,000, another $250,000 of profit this 1 year through a one-time tactic. I'm not the person to teach you that, right? That's not what I'm focused on. we're focused together on how can you build a sustainable, durable, profitable business that you scale. And to do that, the best way to think about it is to put these cumulative compound advantages on your side and let them run over time. The beauty of making your business more owner independent, and let's talk about this for a moment, is that it allows you, and this is really important, it allows you to stay with it longer. Why? Because you're enjoying it. Like, I'll give my example. I could retire today and go off into the sunset, but it would drive, first of all, I would drive my family crazy, especially my wife. She'd be like, go find something to do. You're bugging me. Too much time, too much together. She's got all these varied interests for her. But from a business perspective, if I was working 70 or 80-hour weeks, which 20 years ago was common for me. It was common. I was on the road 2 weeks out of every month. Common for me. Yes, I did back then take probably 4 or 6 weeks of vacation time each year, but I was working really hard. Not necessarily smart 20, 25 years ago, but really hard. But I wouldn't sustain that now in my 50s. There's no way I would do that. I wouldn't sacrifice the time with my family, watching my kids grow up. Now, my kids are in ages now that they want less time with me, but they still want some. Earlier today, before I came in the studio to do this recording, one of my sons was feeling a little bit sick. And my wife and I sat with him. He's laying on the couch, and he reached out and he held my hand. He hasn't held my hand like that for a long time. I treasured that moment. It was like I melted. I'm like, screw going into the office. I'm taking another half an hour here until he got tired of holding my hand. I milked it for all I could. My point being that when we build an owner-independent business, it allows us to enjoy what we do more so that we want to stay doing it longer. It also makes the business more durable because it's not reliant on us, and if something happens to us, it can still go. And so when I look at it today, I work a fraction of what I used to work. This year I'm taking, like, for example, I'm about to, as I'm recording this, I'm about to enjoy a summer off for 3 months without working during that time. That's allowing me to stay in the business longer. I can't imagine not doing this business through my 50s. Matter of fact, I can't imagine not doing this business through my 60s. Think about that. If I can get another 20 years of compounding these gains, 20 more years of taking these growth and compounding it, can you imagine what that means for the business? Can you imagine what that means for you? So yes, do these things to get these marginal advantages that now are cumulative, compounding for you. And at the same time, if you do some of the other pieces that we're coaching and helping you to do to make the business less reliant on you, more enjoyable to own, which also makes it more durable from that part, you're going to be able to have, like many of our coaching clients do, it's at year 5 or year 7 or year 10 that the things that they did prior, they start seeing these cumulative gains, and they wake up one day, they're thinking, oh my God, we just made 10 times the profit we did 9 years ago, 10 times. And I'm working a quarter or half what I used to work. I'm enjoying it more. My team have stepped up. We've got great systems and internal controls in place. And the culture of our business says that we're truly creating strategic depth in everything we're doing. Can you imagine that power? So that's what I want for you. Today, if you take anything away from it, I want you to take about how can I have a more sophisticated view of scaling my business? I've given you 3 scaling leverage points that matter, such that I can have accumulation of these marginal advantages that I can compound over time. This is how you win big the game of business. Thank you, and I wish you the best of success.